Hello everybody, I'm super excited today because right now we are about to go over the Python tutorial. So right now I'm going to introduce you into the basic elements of the Python language, and we are going to get you jump started into using your Python IDE or your little console. And so first it's going to be very important to understand some of the syntax and some of the structure of the language. So let's jump in. So what is Python? Python is a popular programming language. It was created by Guido van Rossum. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name, but it was released in 1991. Python can be used for web development, mostly server side, so mostly the back end of web development. It can be used for software development, and finally, it can be used for scripting, so you can use it in your command line. Why choose Python? Because Python is awesome, and there are lots of reasons to use it. First of all, it works on different platforms, so you can use it on your Windows, Mac, Linux. You can use it on Raspberry Pi if you know what that is. It has a very simple syntax. It's similar to the English language, so it is easy to flow right into. It allows developers to write programs with fewer lines than some other programming languages, so it is easier to use essentially. So the Python syntax. Python was designed with a programmer's needs in mind. Not only is it super versatile, it is also easier to use. So in comparison to other Python languages, Python is designed for readability and has some similarities to the English language with influence from mathematics. So very easy to read, and it reads like English a lot of times. It uses new line to complete a command, whereas a lot of programming language use semicolons and parentheses to indicate that a command has been completed. So when we say new lines, we mean you hit enter and you go down to the next line. It also relies on indentation using white space to define scope, such as the scope of loops, functions, and classes, which we will get into. That's kind of in the next couple of videos, not so much in this module. So other programming languages often use curly brackets for this purpose. So we will not spend much time dealing with indentation today, but that is something that you should keep in mind, that Python uses indentation as opposed to curly brackets to create scope. Python indentation. So looking at indentation, as mentioned earlier, Python does use indentation, and it refers to the spaces at the beginning of code, where in other programming language, the indentation in code is for readability only. So usually in other programming language, it doesn't take into account the amount of spaces. It doesn't even read those, as a matter of fact, in most other programming languages. Whereas in Python, we use it in order to indicate the end of a command or scope, like I said earlier. So here we have an if statement. We're saying if 5 is greater than 2, then, and see we have this indentation. If it is, then print 5 is greater than 2. So that's a proper indented if statement. Then we have if 5 is greater than 2, and then there's no indentation. This is wrong. It will give you an error. These two lines do not correlate because there is no indentation. The number of spaces is up to you as a programmer, but it has to be at least 1. You have to use the same number of spaces in the same block of code. Otherwise, Python will give you an error. The best piece of advice I could say is make sure that you are consistent in your indentation. And like I said, this is something that we're going to get into the next tutorials. Here we have some examples of Python comments. Comments are used to explain Python code. Comments can be used to make code more readable. Comments can be used to prevent execution when testing code. So here's an example of a comment. So here we use this hashtag symbol. So this is a comment, and then underneath we have our hello world. And you can see you'll see in the code, it usually color coordinates it, that whenever there is a comment, it colors it in a different color so you can tell. Then you have your line of code. You can also have your comments within that same line, and it will not impact the code. Python will just ignore this comment. Anything after the hashtag mark, it will ignore. You can even put your code into comments, and it will automatically ignore everything. So just make sure that if you are trying to use a line of code, that it doesn't have that comment in front, because obviously anything with that hashtag symbol, Python ignores anything that's after it. As for multi-line comments, there are several languages where you can have multiple lines in your comment, and this is not something that Python supports. And so whenever we have multiple lines, we just need to have multiple hashtag symbols, one in front of each line that you do not want to use as code. All right, now talking about Python variables, here we have variables are containers containers for storing data values. Unlike other programming languages, Python has no command for declaring what type of variable it is. A variable is created the moment you first assign a value to it, and variables do not need to be declared with any particular type and can even change after they have been set. So here we have an X is being set to 5, Y is being set to John. You see that 5 is an integer and John is a string, so that automatically makes X an integer and Y a string. And when we print, our print statement can print both integers and strings. String variables can be declared either by using single quotes or double quotes. So here we have our single quote, and here we have our double quote, and it doesn't matter, that is going to be the same thing. Variable names. A variable name can have a short name like X or Y, or a more descriptive name like age, car name, total volume. Rules for Python variables include: they must start with a letter or an underscore character. So here we're starting, all of these legal variable names start with either a letter or a character, or the underscore character, I'm sorry, a letter or an underscore character. So all of these start with a letter or an underscore character. They cannot start with a number. So notice that it's under illegal variable names. We have a 2. So that is illegal to start off a name with a number. They can only contain, so names can only contain alphanumeric characters and underscores. So anything between A and Z, 0 and 9, and you can also do the underscore. Here we have a bunch of underscores. You can have a number in your name. It just can't be that first letter or that first character in your variable name. You can see that you're not allowed to use dashes in your names. So make sure that your names are not including numbers at the beginning, dashes in the middle, or any spaces. Remember also that variable names are case sensitive. So age with all lowercase and age with a capital A and then age with all capitals are 3 different types of variables, or they're 3 different variables. So make sure that you're keeping in mind case sensitivity for Python. So there are different data types in programming, and in programming, the data type is a very important concept. A variable can store data of different types, and different types can do different things. Here are a few of the very basic data types that Python has. So here we have a string. So X is equal to hello world. So that is going to be a string. Oops, and in my slide I don't have a right quotation mark, so that was an error on my part. It should say quote hello string quote. So that would be a string. An integer is going to just be some number without a decimal point, and then a floating point is going to be some number with a decimal point, and then a Boolean is going to be either true or false. There are other types of data types in Python that we will get to in later modules. However, for now, I just kind of want to have the simpler data types in front of you to work with. Python operators. So operators are used to perform operations on variables and values. There are many types of operators used in Python. The following are arithmetic operators, meaning they are used in mathematical operations. So in future modules, we will be going over other types of operators, but in this module, it's just important that we understand the mathematical operators. So these are operators that you should be very familiar with from using them in your math classes. And so we have the addition operator, and you can see we're just adding these two variables together. Subtract, we're subtracting the 2 variables. Multiply, we're multiplying the 2 variables. Divide, we're dividing 2 variables. And this is the one that you're going to want to pay close attention to. This double star means exponent. And if you remember, when you have an exponent, you have a base and a power. And remember, you would have that base, which is the normal size number, and then a power, which is up to the very right, and it's kind of a little bit smaller. That is going to be your exponent. And you multiply, it multiplies whatever this number, that base is, to itself as many times as its power has. So hopefully you are familiar or remember using exponents, because you're gonna need to use them in this particular module. Finally, let's talk about Python casting. So there may be times when you want to specify a type onto a variable. So like I said before, you may start out with an integer, or you may have an integer, but now you need your integer to be a double or a string. This can be done with casting. So here we have X is equal to integer, and then we're casting this 1 to an int. Now this is a meaningless cast because 1 is already an integer. However, this is not an illegal move. You can do this to ensure that something is an integer. Here we have Y, and when we cast 2.8, to an integer. So we're using this int and then this double parentheses again to cast 2.8, which is a floating point number, to an integer. It will be 2. So it just chops off this 0.8 and now it just makes it a 2. Here we have z and we're taking an integer cast and we're casting, what is this? This is a string. How do we know it's a string? Because it has a double quotation mark, right? So quotation on the left, quotation on the right, and a 3 in the middle. That makes that a string and not a number. And so we are casting this string into an integer. And so we are actually making that string an integer 3. So that's very neat. That's a very cool thing that Python can do. It makes it very easy to cast numbers into any type of other data type, or cast any data type into another type of data. You can do this same type of action with floats and strings. So if you wanted to make 2.8 into a string, you would just use the same operation and you'd put str and then put it in the parentheses, and then it would become a string data type. And this is a very important concept that you should really try to grasp. If you have questions on it, please let me know, because you are going to be using this in your assignment. So let's go ahead and jump on down to the next video where we are going to get into some actual coding.